So Human Torch's first gameplay is shown, and we can get a look at his abilities. He's a duelist, and he has some really fast-paced, fiery moveset. The first is his main attack. Now, this only has 6 ammo, so that does seem to be a bit of a problem, but it does a lot of damage per hit. You'll also notice how he's flying through the air. So he's the 3rd flying character we have in the game alongside Storm and Iron Man, but he seems to move pretty quickly through the air, and he has some really awesome movement abilities to get him from point A to point B, which we'll look at in a second. So his second attack is this big sort of meteor dash down to the ground. So he will bring himself straight to the ground, create a big fiery effect around him, and also knock back enemies. This seems to be a really useful, versatile tool for damage dealing, displacing enemies, and really, quite interestingly, getting you out of the sky back onto the ground in dangerous situations. Now, his next attack is really interesting. This is his secondary. He'll fire big fireballs that will hit and do AoE damage. It seems to be a decent amount of damage, and it'll also tick for damage over time. But this then pairs into the next ability, which is really awesome. You will connect the flaming embers of that secondary attack and create a fence or a wall of fire. In the footage, we actually see him using 4 of these fireballs and then following it up with this sort of flame wall effect, and it will connect all of those fireballs together, dealing damage over time to anyone caught in the flame walls. The next ability is sort of like a movement boost. You'll dash through the air, and you do really go fast. And as we see in this gameplay here, he actually chains that with the dash and then goes into the meteor strike. It's a really fast-paced moveset here. It should be added that it seems to have some kind of fuel meter similar to, say, Star-Lord's movement in the air, and I'm going to assume it just means you're going to move faster when this is activated to sort of counter the fact that you're, stuck floating in the air, and it seems a little bit more fluid than the Iron Man jetpack, that's for sure, but we only got like a tiny little glimpse of it in the footage here. And then next what we see is Human Torch's ultimate. It's a large supernova firestorm, and what's really crazy about that is he's firing his attacks into it. Now, I'm not sure what's going on there. I'm going to assume that might make it more powerful or do more damage, but what's really cool is it can be comboed with Storm's ultimate. If Storm goes into this firestorm, just check out what happens. Yes, it ends up turning into a firestorm, and what you can see very clearly here is this is actually enough damage to out-damage a Lunar Snow ultimate. So I'm going to assume this is an even more powerful version of Storm's ult, and it makes sense because you're combining 2 ultimates together, basically. But this is such a cool team up. Now, remember how I said there's not much ammo for his main attack? Well, it turns out he has some kind of passive function. You see these little fireballs on the screen? It seems as they charge up, he will gain 1 extra ammo. So whilst he does technically have 6 ammo, he has an extra 6 on reserve somehow. And I'm not sure quite how these things will charge up, but I'm guessing with this mechanic, you don't necessarily have to reload. You just have to wait for these fireballs to recharge. So you're not wasting time with reload animations. Whilst the storm sort of hurricane thing does happen, I'm not sure if that's going to be considered an actual team up or not, or if Storm will get an anchor bonus, because we can actually see Human Torch does have another team up, and it's the same Invisible Woman team up that Mr. Fantastic gets. So it may be that he can get a little bit of extra passive healing or defense. I'm not sure if it's going to work in the exact same way as Mr. Fantastic's or be slightly different. Another thing to notice is he's got 250 HP, so he's a fairly squishy duelist, and I think that makes sense because he does feel like he can move through the air pretty quickly compared to Iron Man or Storm, and on top of that, he's quite a small hitbox character. Now, what about the playstyle for Human Torch? It's going to be interesting to see how he fits into the meta. Iron Man is a really good, strong sort of AoE character that can blast opponents around corners and deal a lot of explosive damage when paired with the Hulk team-up. Then we've got Storm, who is able to deal damage by piercing multiple targets through each other. So one shot will go through multiple targets. So lining up with Storm kind of on the ground and not necessarily flying through the air seems to be the best way to play Storm. Now, there's two things that both of the flying heroes have that make them not as good as Human Torch in some cases. Both Storm and Iron Man have very limited range on their primary attacks. Sure, Iron Man has the longer range blaster attack, but his main Uni-Beam and Storm's main attack have a limited range. So perhaps that's where Johnny Storm could come in. Perhaps he's going to be better at dealing damage longer distance and flying around between the front line and back lines very quickly with his movements. It really is going to depend on how fast and how far his attack distance is. We'll have to wait for the patch notes and the website update to see those details. I think that he's going to be a fairly difficult character to play as well, because one of the main sort of bonuses of playing this character seems to be managing his cooldowns, not only for how long his abilities are available and how many seconds you have to wait before you can use them again, but also the primary and secondary attack cooldowns seem to matter a lot. There's this weird flame feature that seems to recharge your ammo over time, so you almost want to be alternating your primary and secondary attack. And I noticed that the secondary attack also recharges over time as well, so you've got to try and alternate between that and then alternate the flame wall attack, and you got your shift to move faster, and then the meteor attack. There's a lot of micromanaging cooldown abilities, and I think when perfected, you're going to do a lot of damage that takes over time that's going to stack up. You know, you got your primary attack, your secondary, the flame wall, and the meteor that could all do ticks of damage over time. That could all stack up to do massive amounts of damage once you've mastered those cooldown timings. Now, the next thing to talk about, is he going to be meta? Is he going to dominate everything and be so powerful that he's going to be a top pick, going to get banned in Diamond Plus, or is he going to kind of fall off? Well, if we compare him to Mr. Fantastic, the other duelist that released, I definitely think there's more potential for Human Torch to be in the meta. Personally, I think that Human Torch seems to do a lot of AoE tick damage, and I'm very curious to see how much damage he can do to the supports. We know now that the supports are going to get nerfed the next season, so the triple support meta may not even be as much of a thing. But if there's some way for him to sort of like put AoE damage on the backline and potentially out damage some of the heals coming in, I think there's a lot of potential there. But like I said earlier, I think that he's going to be a little bit difficult to play. Mr. Fantastic had the same deal though. Mr. Fantastic was kind of a bit difficult to master, and a lot of people sort of shied away from that and considered him a bad hero. But now we're seeing a fair amount of Mr. Fantastic players doing really well, even at the higher stages of rank. So I would say when you first play Human Torch, give him a proper try and don't listen to what anyone else is saying online, because everyone's going to have their first opinions of him and they may be entirely wrong before we really figure out his potential. So stay tuned. We'll be doing the same for The Thing very soon, so I'll see you for that one. Cheerio.